Europe or South Africa, and good God, what are you doing up this hour for all of you calling in from Australia? So really pleased to have you here for the 10th issue of our monthly CMC Solves webinar series. Since we only have 30 minutes, I appreciate your time, and there are still a couple of people that seem to be logging in as I speak, but they'll catch up. So for those of you who are coming for the first time, we try on a monthly basis in this series to capture items of interest that are on the hearts and minds and lips of our clients and our prospective clients. And today we're going to cover the topic of next generation management of the recovery function as it relates specifically to agencies, DCAs in the UK parlance. And more our regulators are acting as if they don't want us to use third parties. So we have to be aware of that. I'm going to cover what's new in a couple of guidelines in the U.S. That are just really fodder for the discussion, and then talk about what we can do about agency policies and how our vendor management practice can eliminate exposures. Before I dive into it, as always, we're very, very eager to get your comments and suggestions, so please either email them to us, care of Garrett Baird or gbaird@cmcagile.com, or in the post-webinar survey, please feel free to tell us things you liked, things you didn't like, topics that are of interest that you'd like us to cover in the future, because we take that and that informs our webinars in the future. So I think I wanted to start just by reminding us all what you probably all know in your respective geographies. And I have here just the logos of all of the dastardly deed doers that work in the regulatory bodies in various different countries in all of the geographies that I mentioned in my intro. I'm going to focus in this webinar on two very recent guidelines that have come out by the CFPB and the OCC, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency here in the States, but by no means do I intend to limit our response and what we're proposing to those geographies. I know that APRA in Australia is making very, very similar noises. It's almost as if the regulators are all around the world comparing notes and trying to one-up each other as to what they're asking us to do. So I'll jump right into it. There has been increasingly focus from the regulators on vendor oversight. The newly formed CFPB has made it their mission to tell the banks that the banks are responsible for the activities of their agencies, not just beholden to the agencies to get it right, but that in fact the banks, when the agencies don't get it right, will be liable for the agency's behaviors, and that's cranked up the interest level a great deal. Now, just in the last 30 days, the CFPB has put out a new ANPR that is very broad-ranging. If you haven't read it, please read it. If you haven't responded to it, please respond to it, because I actually was talking to somebody this week from the CFPB, and he's in the research side that works on turning these proposed guidelines into actual guidelines and doctrines. So he reiterated to me that they're very much looking for feedback from the industry. And you know that all the consumeristas will be out there putting their input in, so we have to represent, as they say, on the playground, and we got to put in our comments on that ANPR. If you don't have it and want a copy, email us, and we'll be happy to send it out. Also, at the end of October, the OCC updated the third-party monitoring guideline and reissued it, as far as I can tell, and it's very clear and rigorous on the risk management practices that they are looking to enforce in their when the examiner comes in. So we'll go through that in just a second. And good old FDIC's third-party risk management guideline is also very clear. So if you look at that OCC guideline, they're clear on wanting creditors to be right in the agency's grills as it relates to licensing and registration, templates for the letters and other communications that are sent, the frequency, how the agency handles complaints, what their actual business process is for litigation handling, as well as for skip tracing and do not disturb. So you just go through it and you read this guideline, and it becomes chillingly clear that not only do they want us to be quite involved in what the agencies are doing, but also able to prove our level of involvement. Turning over to the ANPR that the CFPB just put out, if you look through the various sections, they're both focused on the quantity and amount of information that gets shared with agencies and debt buyers, how it's transferred, who has access to it, and then once it has been made available to the agency, exactly how our agency and internal collections departments handling communications and communication technologies and managing collector practices. So if you see the ANPR and you realize that for the first time the CFPB is saying not just we at the CFPB want to regulate what agencies are doing, they're also making a bid to regulate what first-party collections practices are. So again, I urge you to read it and get yourself familiar with it. The FDIC has been at this a while, and we've just excerpted from their management oversight guidelines the kind of things that they're asking. So did management review, is the institution's compliance management system adapted to also now address third-party relationships and appropriately respond, including how does the third party respond to complaints, and is that comporting with the bank's way of doing it? And is there a periodic review, and then again, what's the proof of that periodic review going on with third-party operation? And I don't need to tell you guys, but there just seems to be a drumbeat, an increasing drumbeat of enforcement actions that are coming out. Most recently, of course, the consent order by Chase and the multi-billion-dollar settlement that they've made to cover all sorts of actions. But a big part of the consent order was focused on third-party service providers, including attorneys. You're well aware of the previous ones at Cap One, Discover, and Namex that were related to the vendors' tactics, not even the own bank's call center. So compliance is a huge issue and a huge risk. So I just wanted to pause for a second and get the sense of the group on the subject of what's happening in your vendor management. So the first question is, and I'll launch this poll, sorry I can't talk and click at the same time. Have you noticed a change in the way your organization manages third-party agencies or DCAs? And it varies from, yes, we've made significant changes in agency management or vendor management, or we've made some changes, or we're looking at making changes, or nope, we're all good and proceeding business as usual. So I'll leave the poll window open. I see a few people coming in. It looks like I'll give you another, say, 10 or 15 seconds. Wow, you guys are quick. It looks like the preponderance of the respondents here are saying they've significantly revamped, with some people saying, yeah, we've made some changes. And nobody on this webinar, at least, is admitting that they are proceeding business as usual, although when we're out in the marketplace, and let me close the poll. Thank you for that. When we're out in the marketplace talking to folks, we have heard more often than I wish were the case, people saying, you know, we know we need to make changes, so we haven't made them yet. So let's just level set here. There are a bunch of issues on the third-party side of trying to keep our business as creditors, and they're being barraged by requirements from their bank customer, you know, from the vendor managers at the banks, but they're also being barraged by regulators. I just spoke with an agency that we do business with yesterday, and they were preparing for a CFPB audit of them for the first time. So, but that's not what I'm talking about in this webinar. I'm really going to focus exclusively on our issues as creditors and how we handle the visibility, the transparency, and the auditability to be able to handle the regulator scrutiny that I characterize as the sins of your agencies are now your sins, and the impact of that on reputational risk and the amount of resources it takes to manage that. So I think it goes without saying that the bank's perspective as it relates to DCAs and agencies has changed from, hey, just make us the most money, you can be opaque, in fact, what I don't know won't hurt me, to a very clear pendulum swinging to the other end of the spectrum saying, hey, just keep us out of the papers. I need to know exactly what you're doing. I need to have not only transparency but great scrutiny over what you're doing for me. And so how the agencies are reacting is that whereas a year to a year and a half ago, when I was talking to agencies saying, how far will you go, what will you do, they said, well, we don't have to do that much. It's all about our performance, and people are challenging us all the time on performance. Now I hear a different, completely different cadence from the agencies, which is, hey, we'll do whatever it takes to keep the bank's business. We're prepared or need to be prepared to provide the bank all of our documentation and all of the proof of our compliance. And we understand that we have to work with our bank clients because they have to be able to pass muster with their auditors. And the agencies that figure out how to do that better are going to be the winners in the game. So if I review very quickly the challenges to prove compliance, it's not just doing these things, it's proving these things, is that I'm being asked by the regulator to prove the contact policies and controls in place at my agencies are consistent with and acceptable to me as a bank. I'm asked to be able to prove that when people are making contact attempts, if there is an express consent requirement, that they're capturing it appropriately, that the offers or treatments that are being made, certainly if they're working first-party treatments, but if they're working on charge-off debt, program offers and so forth, settlement offers, that those are consistent and they conform with my bank policy. In addition to all the licensure, registrations, and having a handle on the internal policies and practices of the agency as regards collector training and handling of customer disputes, complaints, do not call, and so forth. So let me stop there for another quick survey question, and I will try to launch it if I can do this right. Where do I here, this one? Polls, sorry. Sorry, I'm just a little bit slow on this. So I'm launching a poll now. It's a very quick yes, no, or tell me more if you don't know a yes or no. And that's, has your bank deployed any new automation to capture and track agency policy and practice information, such as documentation that previously was just managed by having your vendor management team check to see if that information was there, and then you check the box in a spreadsheet or a form or whatever. Is there automation being deployed to capture and track it? I'll keep it open another 10 seconds. Wow, you guys are good. I feel like, I don't know if any of you watch the American TV show The Voice, where they have instant saves, and it seems like everybody watching the TV is getting ready to tweet their answers. It feels kind of like that. You guys are great. So I'm going to close the poll. It looks like 80% of you are saying, yep, you're deploying new automation, and 20% are saying, tell me more or no. So we will tell you more about the way we're going to recommend this gets handled. So what really is the challenge? It's a mountain of paperwork if you just break down all of the different documentation that relates to at least policies and practices that range from being able to prove that you've reviewed the financial statements, looked at their licensure, their bonding. You've got their policies and procedures in hand, proof that they're registered and insured in all the states and in good standing, and how they handle and capture complaints and all the stuff that they're asking you to provide. That challenge just basically is broken down into first capturing the information that's relevant to what you want to know about the agency, and then having a way to categorize the data and sort it and store it into ways that are not only addressable but understandable bundles of information that you might be able to do a workflow or a strategy against. And then, once I've done that, how do I look into the information I've gathered in a way to identify the necessary actions and where appropriate remediations that need to be taken? And then acting upon that assessment and acting upon not only the data, but capturing the fact that you maintain the appropriate controls. So just the fact that I had it in a SharePoint, file doesn't cut it. What I need to do is prove that I've assessed the information in that file, that I have been able to identify areas that require further investigation or in some cases action, and that I can prove that that action was taken and that I then post-audited that action or that remediation. So one more poll question for you, and I think I know how to do this time. Where would you position your bank as it relates to vendor management on this 1 to 5 scale, which is at 1 we've got, yeah, we keep a spreadsheet of all our vendor reported compliance, but really nothing proactive in view of changes and tracking of vendor actions. A 3 would be we regularly collect updates of the vendor's policies, and I'm receiving files of completed actions by the agency, and I'm using those completed actions to then form my action plans as to what to do next, all the way through to we have a fully automated vendor management system that tracks audits, that tracks audit results, that tracks remediations, and identifies next required actions. And it looks like we're about 50-50 between folks that are at the 4 to 5 area in the scale and folks that are still south of 5, closer to 1. Okay. Again, you guys are awesome. Thank you for your quick responsiveness. Move this right along. I'm going to close the poll and go back on to the topic at hand, which is so what? So how can CMC help in this process? Obviously, there's a boatload of paper-based documentation out there that we need to somehow digitize, but that's a small part of the problem. It isn't just capturing the documents themselves, it's capturing the metadata about the documents that we can then strategize on and hopefully create alerts and notifications for when I'm out of the boundaries that I've set for my workflow, and also the evidence of an audit and evidence of remediation that can allow me to be in control of it from a vendor management standpoint, but also let me have the ball as to how much and when I give the agencies themselves as control, both as it relates to entering the documentation and filling out the questions about the documents and their policies and practices, but also what their play is in remediation and how that all plays out. It all comes down to auditability and within that provability without having to throw a whole phalanx of staff to dig up the information that we've been collecting, but rather the documentation is captured in a consistent workflow with these automated notifications and complete logging of the activity so that when it comes to provability, I can say to the regulator, here's all of my policies enacted and executed in this way, and here are the executional elements of what I've been doing. And I will also mention that we have a product called FlexCollect, which is used in both collections and recovery. And what I'm about to show you is fully compatible with that FlexCollect solution in that the same engine is going to drive both of these behaviors. So when we talk about this solution, we talk in terms of the vendor management automation, and then I'll talk about auditability in a minute. But what we're talking about here is that you have your own compliance playbook, for want of a better word, and you create your own checklist of the information that you want to maintain, both your framework and questions you want to ask as well as the documents you want to require, and how you're going to do your own unique remediation and audit process. We then apply technology, some business process automation software, automatic alerting, and tracking for remediation and reporting, and that's what we call our CMC Agency Policy and Procedure Automation Solution. The process, as you can imagine it, is once you set up your playbook, you then go to your agencies or DCAs or other vendors and you have them log into a portal where they answer the specific questions and upload whatever supporting document you need into that portal. You then can review and score the results of their activities using your own access to the system through a self-service web portal. And you get to put your scores and review findings into that same workflow so that you have kind of an audit flow through the same workflow that the agencies used. And then with that, you get a report of what audit findings or exceptions there are, and then only that workflow of findings and exceptions needs to be remediated and then captured in an automated fashion that allows you to have a report on all of the work and all of the cues of effort. So basically what we're doing here is we've got all the different vendors and agencies and DCAs submitting their documentation and workflow answers into a standardized and separate cloud-based solution provided by CMC on behalf of your bank that your bank vendor management personnel will use to then identify any remediations that are required. And if you're familiar with the platform that we have and the FlexCollect solution, you're already familiar with workflow authoring, so you can set up workflows like this one that I'm showing on the screen that at the strategist level determines your playbook. And then within that playbook, you define not just the answers to the questions, but what documents do you want to have them capture. And then in practice, so now your portal looks something like the picture I'm showing you on the screen, and you can have both the workflows that are being done and the documentation associated with that, as well as audit information, all in the same place. So once your vendor manager sets up the strategies, your agency logs in and literally answers the questions. Do you collect in this jurisdiction in this particular workflow example? Are you licensed? If so, I need you to upload the license. And down here, enter some registration, status, and renewal date information. That's really the key metadata. Now, I can pre-populate a lot of that when I know it, and I can then take the answers as the agency is entering the information and standardize it so that even that metadata is captured in a consistent way I can use to do strategies, further decisioning, alerts, notifications, whatever. And I have room for the agencies to keep me informed on comment spaces as well. So once the agency has put in all that information, they look at it, they see the summary of all the information that they've done, they press the button, and when it's in the system, now your vendor manager can go through and see that it's all there and can go through their own version of the workflow, starting again with that workstation. They can score how each of the steps of the workflow did or did not meet the vendor manager's requirements, and with that score can then create audit findings. And those audit findings at an individual workflow task level are captured in the system as well. So now I've had the agency go through the workflow once. As a vendor management team, I've gone through the same workflow and created audit findings. And now the audit findings that require remediation can be passed back to the agency, and the agency can refill those steps and remediate to your satisfaction. And then there's the reporting that you would imagine that can tell you by task or by individual DCA, by workflow, exactly where is each of your agencies on each of the required steps that they're going through. And you could have this by the first pass through or on the remediation step or whatever you want. So at the end of the day here, what we're doing is acting as a kind of Rosetta Stone between your bank's playbook and your third-party vendor's ability to manage their documents and their responses to your requirements in your playbook. So we've kind of, a way of looking at it is that little picture on the right. We've made electronic those currently folders or files of information, and more than just, say, creating a bunch of files in SharePoint, we're creating a workflow-driven control point so that you have the ability to have the agents do the agencies or DCAs provide the input. They do the data entry, and in so doing, you can provide transparency throughout the bank and to each agency individually. Obviously, one agency doesn't see the inputs of any other agency. They only see the adequacy and completion of the bits you're asking from them. You then are automating the actual audit and the vendor management reporting by going through that same workflow yourself and scoring their responses and the adequacy of the documentation that they provided. And all of that is logged as an audit, again, provable to the regulators. Then when you get your agencies or your vendor managers to go through that audit fail set of steps within the workflow, and only those steps, and capture the remediations, that's all captured and logged. And again, you're leveraging the infrastructure and the expertise to write these workflows and create document templates and all that already exists within Creditability users that are either using Creditability and some other part of the business, or specifically Flex Collect for collections or recovery. So the so what here is that you can, and your regulators and examiners can be very confident not only that the compliant policies and practices are in place, but that you have an automated way of capturing anomalies, remediating those, and that the reports themselves are comprehensive because you forced yourself to go through a structured set of steps and captured that you went through those steps. So this isn't like a lot of the automation that I'm seeing where people use SharePoint or something like that, and then a separate task checklist, which is still, at the end of the day, a manual checklist. This, by contrast, is all automated in one place. And it leaves the agencies alone to deliver their unique value add that we love and count on them to provide. But I can ensure that they adhere to my schedules by providing notifications and alerts. I can make sure that their people don't have to waste a lot of time getting me the information I need, and they can focus on the really important tasks of collecting, because that's what agencies want. They don't want to be burdened with having to do this manual stuff every minute. But you want them to complete it comprehensively and to remediate in a timely fashion and have that all be logged and auditable from a provability standpoint for your regulators. And that's really how you make this particular vendor management an extension of how you're already operationally compliant with your agencies, which was the subject of last month's webinar. So clearly we're on to the automation is key, but it's also that systematically creating your business rules and automating those in a systemic-driven way will provide the consistency that you can then apply internally or externally. And it turns out this particular solution is very easy to deploy and to change and modify. It's very quick then to demonstrate the controls are in place when your CFPB and OCC auditors come in. The solution itself, because it's cloud-based, is very fast, much less expensive and easy to deploy than trying to build this from scratch. And because we're not talking about manual steps like, I've got all these SharePoint files, but I have to manually keep track of the logic of what versions from whom and when, this is a much easier to control and modify as the scenarios change solution. I'm going to pause for questions. I've gotten a couple as I've been talking so fast. We just have a couple of minutes left. Let's see here. Is this a one-time process, or can it recur, and if so, on what frequency? That's an awesome question. The fact is that the workflows that you set up can be repeated as often as you want to repeat them. And you determine on what frequency you want to say, I'm going to redo this particular process every quarter, every 6 months, once annually. That's under your control. And every time you say, all right, we've done this audited process all the way through, now I'm going to open up a new one because I want to show the regulators, more different ways of doing it. So that's really good. Let's see. Okay, here's another question. So with the latest news that a large issuer is being sued for their outsourced activities in Mississippi, how would CMC's product have prevented their troubles? Well, the simple fact is, I read that as well. I was trying to figure, I think it was Chase. I think if you dig into what the nature of the complaint is, you'll have better insight than what I'm about to say. But I'm going to hazard a guess that when the examiner started to look at what the agency's missteps were, the reason they're coming after the issuer is that the examiner did not find a compliance management system that would have driven the agency to comport with the bank's policies and practices or be kicked out as an agency. And what this system I've just described to you would do is precisely that. It would have created a series of questions that the agency would be on record as having answered, and a remediation and audit capability that would have enforced the bank's requirement that the agency meet those particular policies and practices. And presumably an agency that continues to fail wouldn't be an agency for very long. And a bank that can demonstrate both the existence of the policies and practices as well as adherence to the remediation steps required to get the agency back on track has a much, much, much better chance of having the examiner say, all right, mistakes happen, but you guys are on top of it, and you're showing me your remediation, you're showing me how you're trying to do better. That's a different kind of relationship with your examiner than the examiner who says, look, this agency ran rampant, and they may not have been doing it with your explicit permission, but there was nothing, explicit that was trying to keep them from doing it. So that's how our system would have hopefully kept the bank out of that particular predicament. Well, we've done it again. We've taken 30 minutes of your life and hopefully not squandered it, but spent it on topics of interest. Please, please give us survey feedback. Tell us what we can do to make this webinar more useful and more valuable to you. And finally, let me wish you all a very Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays of whatever type that you celebrate, and may you have a restful end of the year, and I'll speak to you in the new year. Thanks so much for your time. Good talking to you.